Much. Y'all ready to get started? Laura and Sophia? Jinky?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. Welcome everyone to the workshop for today. Ready, set, it's seed starting time. Learning the basics of seed starting. March is the perfect month to begin for that. Thanks, Sophia. For those of you who don't know us, we are Grow NYC. We're a local nonprofit. We protect the environment, create green spaces, help people stay healthy, give them an opportunity to make a positive impact. We work within the realms of education, conservation, green spaces, and food access and agriculture. Specifically for those of us in the School Gardens program, we're here to help assist any DOE K through 12 public or charter school with their support to either start, maintain a school garden and an outdoor learning space. We're just here to provide resources and help you triage any problems along the way. Next slide, please. Meet the presenter. Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen. I'm a school gardens coordinator in the School Gardens program. I'm also a school gardener at my children's school here in Brooklyn. I'm also joined today by Jinky and Laura. Both of them are also school gardens coordinators. And Jinky herself is also a garden educator with another organization. We're also joined by Sophia, who heads up our Seed to Plate and Root Camp program. So we're all here to help answer your questions and lead you on this journey today. Next slide, please. Okay. In today's workshop, just a few information for today. Please submit your questions using the Q&A that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor it throughout, but if you accidentally put it in the chat, we're also still monitoring the chat and we'll try to catch it, but just know that the Q&A is the best. We are recording for this today. We will share the recording with you in a follow-up email that will also have additional seed starting resources. And if you just need anything in general related to school gardening, you can always check out our Grow NYC distance learning page for a whole bunch of other resources and past workshops as well to take advantage of. Next slide, please. Okay, in today's workshop, we will learn why do people start seeds, supplies necessary, just sort of the basics of it with a little bit of a science lesson, grow light types, hardening and transplanting, and then seed starting with students, some basic tips to work with classes. Next slide, please. So why do we start the seeds inside, especially in March? We do this to extend the growing season. We get an early jump on it, which is really extra helpful for plants that require a longer time to go from seed to harvest. For instance, tomatoes, they take about 90 days from germination to harvest. So if you can get a jump of that in March and do several weeks inside and then transplanting those seedlings outside mid-April, you've really shaved off a couple of weeks of that whole process and you get that tomato earlier to eat. It's educational. You can show your entire process from seed to harvest with your students. They get to witness and participate in the entire process and learn lots of little bits along the way about where their food is coming from and how it's growing. Seed to plate. This really taps into that you yourself are controlling the whole process of where your own food is coming from. You know the route your seeds have taken, whether you purchased them from a supplier or have shared them with another gardener, and then how you have grown them and harvested them. So you have controlled that whole process. And for lots of people, that's really important to know that route. It also helps preserve the heirloom varieties and other maybe forgotten varieties of seeds out there. You can experiment and tinker and then also share seeds with other gardeners who've had success. There's lots of seed sharing programs around. And that will also increase our biodiversity far beyond what the garden centers right now are providing as your basic species. It's also cost efficient. Think about it, if you're just buying one packet or a couple packets of seeds, you hopefully will get a lot of plants from those couple of packets of seeds. And for that amount, if you go to a garden center and have to buy a seedling, that's gonna be an upcharge. So you may not be able to get as many plants as you would have had you just grown them yourselves. So for several, especially right now, saving a few dollars is actually really important. So those are the bulk reasons why we start seeds. Besides, it's also just fun and cool. Okay, next slide, please. The necessary supplies. And so most of us might be familiar with what we need, but in case there are some truly new novice gardeners in the bunch here, we've included this to just talk about some of the basics that you'll need. All right, next slide. Okay, basic supplies. You need your seeds, whether you buy them, whether you've gotten them at a free seed giveaway, or you've just shared with another gardener, you need seeds. A seed starting soil or another medium, we'll go into that in a little bit. Seed trays, as you can see in the photo on this slide, that's a seed tray with small seed cells for growing or other small pots. A spray bottle, that will come important later on when you're watering or your sprout. Labels, grow lights or a sunny window, and space. And we'll talk about some of these in depth later on. I just want to make sure whatever you use, it is sterile. You have cleaned it, and that way no pathogens can get in and ruin your new sprouts going. So make sure you know you've cleaned everything, even your hands when you're doing this. And I also want to say this does not have to be an expensive proposition. Most usually, sort of once you've acquired some of these basic materials, especially trays or pots, you might be able to reuse them year after year, making sure you clean them after each season, and you're really just maybe upping your growing medium or your seeds. So it really actually doesn't have to break your bank. And if it is, tweak around and think about how you're buying stuff. All right, next slide, please.
If you are thinking of reusing your trays, a simple, that very dilute bleach water solution will do.
Yes. And then I mentioned here on making your own seedling pots, if you don't want to use a seed tray. Trays are super helpful if you're going to be growing a lot of seeds, but you can also upcycle other vessels that you have lying around. So in this picture, you see we have milk cartons, yogurt containers, various aluminum cans, even some plucky gardeners using I think that's an orange rind. The sky's the limit. You can do egg cartons. You can even use the tube from your toilet paper. There's a way to fold it to become a little seed vessel. Whatever you use, make sure it's definitely been rinsed out. There's no food residue or liquid residue. And definitely if you're working with aluminum cans, make sure, of course, beware of sharp edges, and especially with students. But the sky's the limit, and you get, be creative, honestly. Next slide, please. Okay, just the basics for starting seeds in drawers. Next, okay. First, we're going to have a small bit of a science lesson about seed anatomy in order to help us understand what's happening on the inside of the seed and why we pay attention to certain external factors to help ensure success. On the left side of the image, you will see everything. We all know that's a seed. It's covered by a hard outer coating that is protecting the embryo that's on the inside. So on the right side, you see the embryo and what looks like tiny little leaves, which they are. They'll be the first leaves, the cotyledons that will sprout later. And then surrounding the embryo is endosperm, which is the food for the embryo. It cannot make its own food until it has first set of true leaves to photosynthesize. So this is all held with inside that little seed that we see so much. All right, next, Sophia. Continue on with science. Let's discuss germination. So once the seed is planted in soil or your medium, the soil is working to surround that seed with heat, moisture, and humidity. All three of these are working together to soften up that outer seed coat, kind of awaken it up and allow those baby roots to form and push down first through the bottom. As you can see, the little roots are starting to form. Once the root system really reaches a critical mass and can draw water and nutrients up through those roots, the embryo will know to begin to sprout upward and push on out above the soil line. As I mentioned before, those first little leaves you see, those are the cotyledons. it cannot photosynthesize from that. The plant is not yet grabbing light and turning that into nutrients. The cotyledons will still supply some nutrients for it, but what it really needs is those first set of true leaves for it to begin to photosynthesize. So that sprout needs to keep on growing and push up for those to take advantage of the light. All right, next slide. Okay, again, the germination factors, water, warmth, and oxygen. All three of these are going to work together, like I said. Water, the absorption of water is key. The soil should feel like a wrung out sponge, so it cannot be too wet or it's will rot out the seed, quite honestly. Warmth, seeds like to be warm. Temperatures roughly 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're comfortable in your surroundings, pretty much your seeds will be as well. Beware a draft, so don't put your seed trays or your pots near a drafty window, drafty door, or even actually, especially in New York City, near your radiator. That can provide too much heat at intermittent times. So just sort of, you're gonna have to, if you're working in your apartment or home, you're gonna have to tweak to find the best spot. Oxygen. Respiration is taking place in all of these viable seeds. The seeds need to be loose and well aerated in that soil. So you don't want something super dense. All of these are working together to awaken that germination process, starting with softening the outer seed coat, which allows those roots to push through, as I mentioned before. So when we're seed starting, we're getting a jump on the entire growing process. It's also possible to get a small jump even on the germination process before the seeds go into the soil. Next slide, please. So some gardeners like to actually soak their seeds prior to planting. Seed soaking is just that. You're either soaking it overnight in water, or you're laying them in a wet paper towel for a few days. You can even put that paper towel in like kind of a Ziploc bag in a sunny window, sort of mimicking a greenhouse effect. And this will actually cause them to germinate after a little bit. And then from there, you can plant into your seed trays. You need to, but why also, this is important and helpful. If you're not sure how old your seeds are, or if you already know that you're working with technically expired seeds, which are probably still viable, you can go ahead and throw a handful into like the paper towel method. And if you'll see after a few days, if some of them are sprouting, great. If you don't have very many sprouting, then you know your germination rate of your seed stash has really gone down, and you'll kind of want to triple, quadruple up in your little seed cell when you're putting your seeds in. That'll increase your chances of success. I just want to reiterate, this is actually an optional step. You do not have to do it, but it is interesting to do with students in class because then they can actually see that seed waking up and seeing the little sprout and the roots starting to pop through the seed coat, rather than just sort of knowing it's happening underground and believing in the process. This helps them see it just a smidge. All right, next slide, please. Okay, going back to that growing medium, what's the best for seed starting? And I just want to say up front, it's not your topsoil, and it is not soil found outside, especially here in New York City. The growing medium needs to be really light and fine, well aerated and loose, free of insects, diseases, weed seeds, contamination. All of those can work together to kill your babies. It also needs to be able to hold the moisture, but drains well. Again, kind of like the sponge. Topsoil will be too heavy, and it actually kind of retains too much moisture, and that will just, the seed won't grow in that condition. And why I made that comment about, especially in New York City, don't use your outdoor soil. We always have, unfortunately, some level of contamination. I think a lot of people of us know that, but sometimes we might get excited and forget. So we really advocate never planting directly in the soil here in the city unless you yourself have gone through the process to get new soil in that's clean or have tested. But if you plan to eat the fruits of your labor, err on the safe side of safety and start with fresh, sterile, light, airy mix. Options for seed starting mixes, excuse me, or you can buy a pre-made seed starting soil mix from a garden center. You can also purchase pre-made peat pellets that hydrate and become your growing medium, or you can also use a coconut coir mix, which is ground up coconut husks, and that's really cool. And that is sold as a brick that you have to hydrate. Those are all acceptable choices for starting seeds. Next slide, please. All right, so the one bad thing about a virtual workshop, and I think this is crucial for seed starting, is to like really feel what we mean, like being able to put your hands into a bowl and really feel what it means to be light and airy and spongy. So you're just gonna have to kind of imagine that's what's happening in some of these pictures you see here. This is just examples of the seed starting mix on your left. That's been purchased from a growing center. The peat pellets, and those are just available. You can Amazon those if you want. And they kind of look like pellets, and then you hydrate them and they expand and become, you know, the growing medium for your sprouts. Coconut coir on the left, that is, it comes in a brick, you hydrate it, you soak it for a little bit, and it just becomes a perfect light, airy medium for growing. Definitely feels like a sponge. I think that one most of all to me feels like a sponge. So those are just some examples of what they look like, what to look for. You can totally Google these and Amazon them to get what you want. All right, next slide. Okay, so you are ready to plant inside. You have your trays filled with your choice of medium, and you have the seeds you want to start. Now it's time to sow them. How do we actually do this? 5 factors to consider. Timing. So this is where you're going to look at your seed packet from germination days to harvest days, and you kind of work backward on the calendar, and then you choose a date to sow them. Water, you want to moisten your soil before planting. Make sure it's not flooded out, not too wet, that it really does feel that spongy. And you're going to keep it moist through germination. Something to help with that is people will put like a plastic cover over their trays or pots to kind of mimic that greenhouse effect and keep the moisture trapped in. Depth. We all know seeds are small, and really you just need to plant at the depth twice the length of the seed. So imagine some of these are super tiny, so you might just be poking your finger in just a little bit to put the seed in there. You're not going all the way down to the beginning. That'll be way too deep and your seeds won't sprout that deep. It's really, really a shallow little hole for these seeds. But you can also consult the back of the seed packet. That really tells you the depth as well. So just pay attention to those details. Quantity of seeds. Plant more than one seed in each little growing cell in a seed tray or your pot. Not all of them will germinate. Absolutely not. If that happens, that's amazing. Loosely, we say 3 to 5 seeds per pot. And if they all germinate, there's a process we'll do later to thin them out, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But just err on 3 to 5 per pot. Labels, that could actually not be more. That's so important for labeling. You want to just do the date that you sowed them, not just for your own memory, but also you'll know if in 10 or 15 days nothing's germinated and it's only supposed to take 5, then you'll know something's really gone wrong with your seeds and you might have to start fresh. But also the plant variety too, especially if you're planting multiple seed species in a tray, it's going to be really hard to keep track of what you planted where, as well as once they start to germinate and sprout upwards, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between all those baby sprouts. Even for experienced gardeners, I can confuse myself sometimes. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we have just a small 10-second little time lapse that one of our school gardeners, Laura, created for us. She started a seed tray with radish seeds. And in this one, you'll already see, she's already moistened it. So you won't get to see that process of Laura moistening the soil before the video begins. But you can see her sort of methodically moving down the seed tray cells, planting multiple seeds into each one. And she's using a seed tray that came with the pre-prepared peat pellets that have already been hydrated. And this tray, Laura told me, also has a water reservoir at the bottom. So it's a self-watering system that you can water the bottom. It's got this tray, it's got a wicking mat. So the seedlings stay self-watered for days at a time, and you don't have to water it daily. So that's really helpful if you need to pop out of town or for some reason you forget about your seeds for the day. All right, Sophia. Ta-da! It's so quick, and Laura makes it look so easy, but it really is easy. So thank you, Laura, for creating that. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks, Sophia. Okay, and just for those who are curious, this is Laura's final setup that she used this year. She's got her self-watering tray with her peat pellets in there, and she also has a single grow light ready to go for when everyone sprouts. And that's how Laura started today. Okay.
Also,
yeah,
just to jump in, I'll mention that previous slide that I put on the light just to get a better photo of everything.
yeah.
But I didn't actually need to use the light until they started sprouting. And at that point, the way the seed tray works in the setup is I can actually lower the light lower down on the plant stand so that the light could be closer to the sprouts, because depending on your sprout, which Colleen will get into later, it should be like about 4 to 6 inches above the sprout.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Sometimes depending on the seed or what you're growing, they actually need the light to start the germination process. But it varies. So, sometimes you might need the grow lights on. Most of the time you do, but check the label and the packaging on whatever you're starting, because some do need that light to start germination.
Yeah, I saw in the chat someone put that they had to, for chamomile seed starting, they needed the light to germinate.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, cool. All right, thanks, Laura. Next slide, Sophia. Okay. A handy tool that we've created to help gardeners identify when to start indoors versus outdoors is this vegetable and herb planting calendar. We also have one for fall, and we will share these with the fall and follow-up emails. For an example, though, on how to actually use this and read it, we have highlighted basil in this green square to show the difference of the timing required if you want to transplant it. That's what the T means after the basil, versus you want to direct seed it or direct sow it, which is DS. So if you look at the basil for transplanting, you can start at March 6th, essentially this week, take a few days to germinate, and you can transplant it outdoors. We have here April 17th. For those of us in New York City, we use mid-April as the last anticipated frost date. So anything after April 15th, you pretty much can plant outside. So you're transplanting mid-April, your seedling. From there, you have 60 days to maturity. So then you're actually harvesting that first basil plant in June 16th, pretty early. However, contrast that to basil, you wait to sow it outside directly. You have to wait to start your entire process mid-April. And then you still have to wait 70 days to maturity. You're not getting those first basil leaves for pesto or your pizza, whatever, not till July 4th. So you've been able to shave a couple weeks off. And if you really like basil and want to kind of keep going throughout the season, this just helps you get a jump on it. All right, so that's how to use that calendar. As I mentioned, it has several more plans. It's a couple pages long, just so you know. And we have one for fall as well. And these 2 calendars will be part of the follow-up process. And that's just sort of a way that we've captured a whole bunch of different common plants together, because it can get a bit much to constantly consult all your seed packets and keep track of all the information. So this is just sort of a handy tool in one place for the gardeners. Okay, next slide, please. And just kind of to reiterate that theme of when do you want to transplant versus when do you want to direct sow? And so we've already talked about transplanting. It gets that jump on the season. You get healthy, hopefully robust seedlings entering the garden mid-April. And we have some examples of ones that are great for doing the process. Direct sowing, why you would choose to wait. Some plants don't need that long to go from germination to harvest. So you don't really need to kind of get a jump start in some regards. Radish is a perfect example of that. You can plant it and sort of 3 to 4 weeks later, have a radish being pulled out of the ground, harvested. That one, radish specifically, is a really popular one with school gardens, because the students in the spring can witness the entire process before they're dismissed for the summer. And that's one way to really get your full lesson in seed to harvest in one school season. No guarantees if those kids will eat the radishes though, or taste test them, but they will at least get to see the process. There's also some plants that have really more delicate root systems than others, and they don't want to be handled so much. They don't necessarily like being transplanted. They want to be sown in the ground, left to do their own thing. Don't bother me, let me just grow. Spinach is one of those, for an example. Here's some other ones that you can just direct sow. You don't need to go through the seed starting process with them beforehand. Okay, next slide, please. All right, your baby seeds have gone through germination. Now you are starting to see sprouts appear above the soil line. This is when your sprouts will need reduced watering, warmth, and light. As I mentioned, reduce the water slightly so as you don't want to continue to overwhelm the babies with too much water. That would encourage kind of probably rot to happen and root rot. This is where it's best to start watering with that spray bottle I mentioned. You just want to give a nice delicate spray to the soil to moisten it routinely. That way it's not overwhelming it. Or you can also continue to use the self-watering system if your trays have that. Here you also want to remove the plastic covers that you might have so as not to trap too much moisture in. That could again cause some rot to happen. Warmth, again, if you're comfortable, your sprouts should be comfortable as well. Room temperature is best. Again, pay attention to any drafts and or radiator heat that might be happening. And then light. So we touched upon this briefly with Laura and Jinky about the grow light situation. This is when, especially once they have their first set of true leaves, the plant needs the light to really start photosynthesizing and provide, creating its own nutrients. If you have a sunny window, awesome, put it there, find some indirect light, that's great. Not all of us are blessed with amazing sunny windows, especially in school classrooms. It might be hard to come by. So grow lights are an avenue to pursue to provide that light. So next slide, we're going to talk about, okay, a little bit on grow lights for anyone who might not be familiar with them. They're pretty simple. They don't have to be so complex. So why the grow lights? Really, like I mentioned, the plants need to photosynthesize, and without it, they can't make their food. The veggie plants especially need more hours of sunlight than non-food plants. And typically, indoor light levels just are not going to reach the same level that outdoor brings. For maximum success, go for the grow lights. 3 elements to consider are your light bulb, color spectrum of the light bulb, and getting a timer for it. Grow lights are typically the light bulb is typically tube shaped, and it's either fluorescent or an LED bulb. For kind of cost efficiency, and especially for classroom settings, we found that fluorescent is kind of the more cost-effective way to go. It either one, between fluorescent or LED, works just fine. They both are same light solutions for the seedlings. The T5 label that you see in our little note here, T just means it's tube shaped. 5 is referencing the size of the diameter. T5 is pretty common. You also see T8. You don't want to range into the T10s or T12s too far because from what I've read, you know, the light efficiency starts to, the efficiency of the bulb starts to decrease faster over time. So T5 kind of is the most efficient. Color spectrum. Plants respond to light, different parts of the light spectrum in different ways. Blue light is going to promote your vegetative growth. Red light is going to promote flowering. Color temperature of the light is also measured in kelvins. T5, as mentioned here, is 6,500 Kelvin, which is similar to outdoor light. So you kind of put all of that together and you can actually just get a full spectrum light bulb, and that mimics the light that plants are experiencing outdoors. If you really want to go like, I just want super vegetative growth, you can also purchase blue lights. If you want to promote the flowering, stick with red. Full spectrum though is just fine for general growing and especially in kind of like a classroom situation. Timer, as you can see here, you actually have to keep those lights on for 14 to 16 hours a day. Sometimes that's really hard to pay attention to turn it on, turn it off. You might, and if you're in a school setting, you might not even be home, or if you're working late, you might not even be home to turn them off. So just go ahead and get that timer. Some systems will come with a timer, others you just have to kind of augment your purchase and get an easy timer on the side. But that will really make it a lot easier for you if you get that timer. And then as Laura talked about with grow lights, once your sprouts are there and your leaves are there, you do need to adjust your light bulbs. Bring them down low when they're baby sprouts, not too low, not too close to the sprout because you can actually burn the leaves. You can scald those baby leaves. And if you get them too high, then your plants will get a little too spindly because they're reaching for that light. They need that light, but they're going to get too skinny and weak and floppy. So you kind of have to tweak and find that ideal number of inches above your light. But you know, I've seen anywhere from starting to 3 inches, starting to 6 inches. But your seedlings will talk to you and tell you if they are happy or if they're not, and you can tweak as necessary. Okay, next slide, please. And so here for folks, we saw the first one, the single tray system. I believe this is the exact model that Laura maybe had. Single tier, good for one seed tray, especially if you don't have much space and or you're not growing too many plants, perfect solution. But there's a 2-tier system. There's also other stackables of combinations. If you, again, don't have as much space, but you do know you want to grow more than one seed tray full of plants, various combinations of stacking options are there. If you want to grow a lot of seed trays, or you maybe in a classroom situation, you have multiple classes maybe doing the same lesson, and you want to give a shelf per class. So this particular model has 5 shelves, room for multiple seed trays. Again, it has the grow light. At one point, for any New York City educators on the call, we know Shop DOE did have a mobile growing cart in their inventory. So I know that's an option as well for DOE vendors. But yeah, but the sky's, you can do a Google search and you'll find so many grow light models. And some people actually just kind of maybe buy the fluorescent tube and fashion a grow light system out of existing bookshelves they have. So it doesn't have to break your bank either. You can DIY solutions. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this kind of goes back to your sprouts. You've given them light, moisture, warmth. How are they doing? As I mentioned, your sprouts will talk to you and they will tell you how they are doing. They will show you very rapidly if they are happy with you or if they do not like you as a gardener just yet. On the left side of your screen is a very happy seedling. It's got a nice green color to the leaves. It has a few sets of true leaves, and it's got a nice thick looking stem wall. The right, unfortunately, is not happy with you as a gardener just yet. The seedlings look stringy and yellow. The plant is what's called etoilated, which means it is growing and reaching for that light. So first, if you're just using your window, you need to kind of play around with the position of the window. Maybe the sun has moved and shifted with the season coming upon us. So you need to play around with the position of the window. If you are using the grow light system, this is telling you your grow lights are too high above them. Bring them lower and see if they respond. And at least they should sort of straighten up first, and then you'll kind of be able to course correct slowly from there. If they continue to kind of be looking really unhappy, also start to pay attention to your moisture level happening in your pot. Is there too much moisture going on and they're actually kind of rotting themselves out? And if they have a couple, the color here on these leaves, you can see is kind of yellowing. It's not a happy, healthy, dark, robust green. Some gardeners, after there's about 2 sets of true leaves, do like to apply a light water-based fertilizer every 2 weeks. You can go ahead and also try that. It needs to be at half strength though. These are babies. They are not ready for the full set of vitamins at all. So half strength fertilizer every 2 weeks. And you can troubleshoot and tweak. And at least on my end, I don't know about y'all, but seed starting is a lot of tweaking in my situation in my apartment. So it's almost like having newborns again. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, thinning seedlings. So remember when we asked you to plant 3 to 5 seeds per that pot or the cell in your tray? And somehow, lucky you, they all germinated. So you have several growing in one little garden cell, little cell. That's awesome, but sadly, you cannot keep them all. This is when you actually have to be a very harsh parent and you need to remove some of them so that one remains in that growing cell and that one will become that healthy, robust seedling that actually will be able to survive outside once you're ready to transplant it. So what the process that we call, it's just thinning them out. You need to wait until all the seedlings in there have multiple sets of true leaves, and then you kind of choose the one that looks the most robust to go with. Critical here, you are not pulling out the others. That has the potential to harm the root system of the seedling you want to stay behind. So what you're going to do is you're going to find very small scissors, sterilize them, and you're going to cut the other seedlings at the soil level, and that's how you're just going to thin them away. Leave their roots in the soil. That's fine. You just are removing what's above the soil line very, very delicately. You can see in the image here, this tray has already been thinned out. So there's one super happy seedling per cell in this growing tray. Okay, next slide, please. All righty. Your seedlings are growing strong now, and we are approaching mid-April. For those of us in New York City, that's our last frost date, as I mentioned. Now it's time to really focus on the last couple steps of getting those seedlings ready for life in the big outdoors. Next slide, please. Hardening. Hardening is a very important step to ensure success. It's when those seedlings are ready for, it's nearing when those seedlings are ready for transplanting. So it's the process of actually acclimating them gradually to the outdoors. And it takes about 1 to 2 weeks. That's not a firm timeline. You tweak as necessary and observe how your seedlings are doing with it. So the process for that, what does this mean? One is to pet your plants. You're going to gently stroke the top of your leaves ever so gently, and that's actually going to encourage plants to build up stronger cell walls. It's almost going to feel like they're being blown by a gentle wind. And they need to be able to get that strength in their stem to be able to handle that, because the real world has lots of wind. Some folks also use a gentle fan setting to mimic that as well. Also cool, one note on the fan, you just need to pay attention that the fan is not actually drying out your soil. So just pay attention to that. We also say take them out for recess, quote unquote, on nice days. You're gonna, on good weather days, not too hot, not too sunny, you're gonna leave those seedlings outdoors or even at an open window for a few hours at a day to acclimate. And you're going to wait until it's consistently above 45 degrees, definitely not too windy either, and just sort of let them be out there, but make sure you're bringing them back in by the late afternoon, evening, and for the night, because the nights will still get cool and that can kill sensitive plants right away. And also you're going to continue to reduce your water. We're going to really start to get these plants ready for outside conditions, because they might not get water every day outside, and they need to be able to survive for those couple of days where they might be a little thirsty, but they know they'll be able to make it and they have strength to make it. So that is you're hardening them up, getting them ready for their city debut. All right, next slide. Transplanting. It's almost moving day. Your seedlings are ready to live outside. You've been really successful starting them indoors. You're ready to introduce them to the world. So 5 elements to pay attention to for transplanting are timing, water, digging your hole, removing them from your seed tray, and then you're watching. So timing, you are going to plant in the seedlings in the ground, preferably when they have at least 3 sets of leaves on the seedling. And after that after the frost date here in the city, for us it's April 15th, wherever in the world you are, you might want to check. Cloudy days are best, definitely not windy days. Hot and sunny days will really stress your baby plants that first couple days out. So try to go for the cloudy days. Preparing your soil before you plant. So you need to water your soil before you plant. If you can remember that, that's great. Moisten it. Don't overflood it. Don't make it a murky soup. Just give it a nice drink of water. Obviously, if you do forget this step, once you're transplanted, you can go back and water as well, but it's easy to do it beforehand. Digging a hole. How big do we dig a hole for these baby seedlings? Actually, you dig it the same size as the root ball of your seedlings. Don't go bigger, don't upsize the hole thinking like it'll grow into it, and also don't make it shallow where maybe the top of your seedling is poking out above the soil line. Just kind of really mimic what they have experienced in their seed starting tray or pot. So we're moving from that seed tray or the pot they've been growing in. Do not just pull your plant out. No pulling. That will break it. That could break the stem, pull it apart from the root system. These still are babies and delicate, even though they're about to move to the outside world. What you want to do is kind of pinch your pot a little bit. You're kind of squeezing it. And as you squeeze it gently, your plant should sort of pop up a little bit, and then you can grab it by that soil base and be able to pull out all of the roots and then transplant that into the hole you've dug. Once you've done that, you kind of pat the soil around it so it's nice and firm in there and stable. Watching. You're going to watch your baby seedlings for transplant shock. They've been kind of growing in near perfect conditions on the inside of your home or classroom. So sort of moving to the outside world is going to be a big change for them, and they might experience transplant shock. And that's where they kind of look ragged for a few days. They might even flop about a little bit. Don't be alarmed too much at first, sort of monitor them for a few days, and then they should slowly kind of perk themselves up. Obviously, if they don't totally perk themselves back up, you may have lost a few in the transplanting. That can definitely happen. Next slide, please. Okay, roots. One thing to think about on your roots is, and something that you might see when you're transplanting, when you're removing them from their seed cells, is the root structure. On the image on the left, you are seeing a super healthy root system. It's white in color, which indicates it's healthy. They're not tangled around each other, and there's a lot of soil for these roots to still grow in. On the image on the right, you are seeing what is called root bound. The roots are still healthy, they're still white in color, but they're all tangled together with no room to grow. So they're kind of just spindling around themselves. What you need to do before you put it into that hole you've dug is sort of gently break apart. Don't break, poor choice of words. Gently nudge them open a little bit, and that will actually spread them apart, and that will tell those roots, oh, there's actually going to be some room to grow and space to grow. And then they will start to search out that new soil and extra soil from their new hole that they will be in. Again, this is a gentle step that you need to do because you really don't want to break the roots. But you do need to kind of open them up a bit. All right, next slide. And here, this is an image from the Grow My Seed teaching garden on Governor's Island, just after this raised bed has been planted with seedlings that they started at some point in time. Everything's nice and tidy in a nice row. They're spaced apart, so each of these seedlings has space to grow and become the bigger plant they want to be. And you can see there's also a label, so they know what's growing in there. And that's really sort of the successful end of your journey of seed starting inside and what you hopefully want to achieve there. Next slide. I'm going to turn it actually over to Jinky for this part.
Great. So seed starting is a great activity for your students, especially if you want them to learn about the notion of where their food comes from and starting from seed and getting it to their plate. So next slide, please. Some of the activities that the kids can do in the classroom, if you don't want to use the seed starting trays, you can upcycle pots, just like Colleen had mentioned earlier, with the milk cartons, with the yogurt containers. I've seen in the chat, even the egg cartons and toilet paper rolls. The kids can decorate that. One thing I want to mention about the toilet paper rolls and the egg cartons, especially if they're paper, you can definitely use them, but you want to keep in mind that they might disintegrate depending on how long it takes for your seedling to be strong enough to transplant. So just keep that in mind, and you'll also want a tray underneath those toilet paper rolls and egg cartons for when you water. And the plastic egg cartons that I've seen are great with the covers because they act like little greenhouses. You just want to make sure there's holes in the bottom so that the water drains out and it doesn't waterlog your seedlings.
I'll also add, I've tried seed starting in the cardboard egg cartons, and I found that they dried out really fast, like within a couple of hours. So I prefer plastic because they dry out too fast. And I've also tried it in toilet paper tubes, and the glue that they use on the toilet paper tubes just kind of fell apart also with watering. But if you kind of tape it together, it could work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. But getting the kids involved is great. They can decorate, and you can also have them start the germination process. If you don't know how old your seeds are, you can kind of quantitate how many of those seeds are going to germinate, and the kids could do the little count for that. And they can keep track of the seeds and when the roots start forming, and then that's when they can transplant. If you're working with groups in the classroom, you can maybe have some of the kids fill the trays with the soil. Another group can poke the holes for the seeds, and then another group add the seeds to the soil. And that kind of helps to have a job for each student. Because sometimes, you don't want a whole 50 or so seed trays out there. So you can have each kid doing something, even though they may not be the same thing, at least they'll participate in some way. Creating labels is fun for them, especially for kids that are artistic. And then lastly, watering. Somebody can be in charge and checking the trays daily to make sure that the seedlings are happy and it's not too wet or too dry. So these are some fun tasks for the kids when you're starting your seeds. And I think that's it. Colleen, any last words?
No, not before questions. Just to reiterate, especially I know we're nearing 5. If you do have to pop off, just know that in a follow-up email, probably tomorrow, we will be sharing the recording with you with additional seed starting resources. So I saw that was sort of a question as well in the chat of if this was going to be available, and the seed starting calendars especially will be there. So I see we do have several questions in the chat.
We do. And if we don't get to all of them, we will try our best to answer these in our follow-up email.
Yeah.
But let's get started. Gwen had asked, she bought her seeds from Whole Foods. Is there a way to know how old they are?
Usually seed packets have kind of like that stamp of expiration date. You'll just kind of have to look around. It's going to be tiny, black ink, but usually all seeds kind of have an expiration date on them.
Yeah, and even if it's past the expiration date, you can still test the germination rate to make sure they are still sprouting by just doing that seed soaking activity.
Absolutely.
We have one from Eden who says she learned about winter sowing recently, starting seeds in recycled plastic bottles as mini greenhouses that are placed outdoors.
I've seen that. I've seen photos of that, although I haven't done it myself. It kind of traps the heat in, and also during the day the sun is hitting it, so it does trap some heat in there. I don't know if I would do it in the dead of winter. I think it would still be, the ground would still be too cold and it would be frozen. But I think it's worth experimenting with. If you can, you could even stick a thermometer into the soil and track how cold it gets in there.
Yeah, it's a great science experiment. And someone had asked about testing outdoor soil. Are there test kits that we can buy? Yes, definitely. Laura, do you know of any test kits?
Yeah, I'll say the test kits that like soil testing kits depends on what you're testing for. So a lot of the ones that you see on the market that people do at home are usually to test just the pH of the soil. But if you want to test for contaminants such as lead, you usually do have to send that to a lab. And so in the city, there's Brooklyn College Urban Soils Lab that does a lead test for about $13, which is pretty affordable. And I saw people in the chat were also recommending the Bronx River Alliance does soil testing. I'm not familiar with that, but it's worth looking into.
Great. CJ asks, are all seeds eligible for seed soaking? Or are there certain seeds you shouldn't do that to?
I've heard that beans can get moldy pretty easily. If you're doing dried beans, you want to grow them. But also I've soaked them and sprouted them and it still worked.
Mhm.
Trial and error, I think.
Right. It's not completely necessary to pre-soak your seeds. It just gives them a head start.
Yeah.
Great. So this will be available later, the recording and the PowerPoint to you. We've got a few questions about that, so we will send it to you in a follow-up email. Someone loves adjustable grow light. Where can we get one? And do you know how much they cost? Great question.
I saw that someone asked what brand I was using in that picture from a while back with my setup. And so I put that the brand is Sunblaster Nanotech T5. I don't know if that, I don't have one recommendation for a grow light. The more you spend on a grow light, probably the better quality it will be. But that one by itself probably costs about $50 just for the bulb.
Mhm.
And then it's extra for like the plant stand and the tray and stuff like that. I once got really cheap grow lights that were like $30 for the whole thing. And I have to say those did not work out very well. So it depends on your budget and what works. And you can supplement, if you're getting a less powerful grow light, you can supplement it by trying to get it more natural light close to a window. But it can vary from $50 for a bulb to like $200, which is on like the nicer side of models, which is what we use for like our teaching garden.
And you can get them at, you can certainly Amazon them and Google it to find options, but also like garden supply centers will have them as well. So they're pretty ubiquitous right now. It's not an obscure thing to find anymore. So you'll have pretty luck with just a general internet search, and then just choose sort of a vendor you might trust or already know.
The ones that are pretty popular, Sunblaster, Jumpstart has one. Happy Leaf is another company that I've heard of. They specialize in LED lights. But yeah, you can do just a Google search. Next question we have, are heating mats recommended or necessary for growing?
I personally have no experience on that one.
I've never used it either.
Yeah.
So not necessary.
They are not necessary. I have heard that certain seeds like peppers do need a higher temperature for them to germinate, but you can kind of do a makeshift heating area. You can put your tray on top of your refrigerator where it kind of generates heat up there. Radiators might be a little too strong for them, plus it dries them out. But heating mats are not really necessary unless you want to grow peppers, and they do have them with thermostats so you can adjust the heat and temperature. But yeah, not necessary. Raina's asking if there's a cheat sheet somewhere for sowing seeds of vegetables, herbs, flowers, and fruit. She never knows when and which should be started indoors or outdoors and when exactly.
Well, our vegetable and herb planting calendar should help you for spring or fall. We sort of, which will be part of the follow-up resources. That's one option to consult and have everything in one handy dandy chart and kind of highlight the crops you want to grow and then work out your own schedule from there. That's pretty easy.
Those calendars do say, they do recommend whether that plant is better as a transplant and when you should start it indoors, or if you should just start it direct sow outdoors. It gives dates for that as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Someone also had asked if we had one for flowers, like a little cheat sheet.
Ooh.
We don't have one for flowers yet.
That's a good idea.
It is a great idea. But a lot of our questions were about vegetables. So we don't have one yet, but that is a great question.
And flowers you can generally plant in succession, just, every couple of weeks, just plant a new batch of them.
Mhm.
Luckily, most of them don't take quite as long to reach maturity as like a tomato plant, where you have to be really conscious of making sure you have 90 days.
Yeah.
We had a question about how much light the seedlings need a day. As Colleen mentioned, 14 to 16 hours a day.
Mhm.
And then we have kind of piggybacking of that. CJ's plant has cotyledons, but not true leaves yet. Should they have sunlight exposure at this point?
I think generally the answer would be no, because the cotyledons are like the baby leaves that come out before the true leaves, and they have a different shape to them as the rest of the leaves of the plant. And my understanding is they don't use photosynthesis.
Right.
At that point, you have to wait for the true leaves to come out. And that's when the plant needs light to start photosynthesizing for most plants.
Yep. That's exactly true.
Raina is an art teacher, and she's teaming up with their STEM teacher. She bought a small shelving unit with some grow lights and placed it on the windowsill with lots of sunlight, but it's also near the radiator. Is that the best place with the draft possibly and the heat from the radiator?
I'm not sure they're going to cancel each other out.
That's a very complex micro ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say move it away from the radiator.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they have grow lights, put them somewhere where they won't be affected by the heat. Just turn on the light and that should suffice, even though, if it's not near the windowsill, the grow lights would be fine. Yeah.
And Jinky, that would be because the radiator would dry out the soil, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alexis is, they have the purplish light in class and the white light. Which is more efficient for the growth of the plant? So I'm going to assume that's the LED light versus the T5. Great question. Colleen, I know you researched some of the LED
Right.
lights.
I did not come across purple as an option.
I think because that probably has the blue and the red together, so it's giving that purplish tinge.
Yeah. And the white light might be more full spectrum, I imagine. It depends on what your full spectrum should do the job. The white light, if you're going through for more of the vegetative growth or the flowering, the purplish would work. I think it depends on what you're growing and what you want to hope to achieve and focus on. I don't know. Y'all have thoughts?
I ordered really cheap grow lights once that were the purple ones, and I see them in other people's windows as well. And mine didn't work very well, but I don't think that had to do with the fact that it was, the purple different spectrum. I think it was just that it was not a good quality grow light. So I think both can work, but it depends on your model. So I can't quite answer that question.
Yeah, it does have to do with the specific wavelength of light that the plants and the leaves absorb. So you might want to check the bulb and what spectrum. So yeah. Gail has a newbie question. She says, in what circumstances, if any, can you just keep harvesting from a plant? Could you just keep harvesting from an indoor basil plant, or does it just go to seed or run out of gas?
You can absolutely keep harvesting as long as your first harvest, you don't remove all of the leaves. If you're just removing a few at a time, then you're going to help keep it growing robust. And especially if you pinch off the top leaves, they'll start to increase more of a plant, and you can really keep one basil plant for the whole season if you just take a few at a time. But if you harvest it all at once, then
You won't have the leaves to photosynthesize. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you want to make sure you catch it before they start to bolt, because if they do that, then all the branches of the basil will start to bolt. Pinch it off before that, you'll get more leaves sprouting from the sides. So technically you can, harvest for as long as the basil is growing.
Yeah.
I also just put in the chat, we put a blog post up on growinmyseeddistancelearning.org about how to prune basil, because it's a common question, and everyone loves basil. I love basil. So if you want to see a video of how to take care of an indoor basil plant, click that link.
Valerie's asking if anyone can recommend how to successfully grow microgreens.
That is another thing I put in the chat. Actually, I might have done that not to everyone, so I'll put it in the chat to everyone. We have a little post on how to grow microgreens on a windowsill, so that's in the link there.
DJ is asking regarding thinning, is it really bad to try to redistribute the ones that seem to be doing well? I'm scared to thin out the plants.
This is when you have to be harsh.
Because if you try and separate them and redistribute, you disturb the roots, and so that might kill the whole thing. So yeah, it's best to thin them out.
It is.
Yeah. Gwen got biodegradable pots. Can I just plant inside starting the pot? And I got biodegradable pots. Can I just plant inside starting pot?
I wonder if they're asking, so they have a biodegradable pot. Do they need a seed starting tray, or could they just start the seeds in a pot?
Or do you start it in the biodegradable pot and then put it in the bigger pot? If it's biodegradable, sure. Put it in a permanent pot. Absolutely. Oh, this is a great one. Cocoa coir is missing nutrients though. I think it's okay for germination, but how to add nutrients? Yes. So someone also had a comment in the chat that they were having problems with their seedlings because of the soil. Cocoa coir is really great for the seed starting, but it doesn't have the nutrients. It does have antimicrobial things, and it's great. So if you want to keep your seedlings from getting moldy, you can use a cocoa coir. But once your seeds germinated, then you do have to add nutrients. You can use liquid fertilizer to water, and once your seedling is strong enough, you can actually transplant it and add soil to it. That's one way to add the nutrients in there.
And I'll also highlight, to add to that comment, that someone in the chat also mentioned coconut coir is much more environmentally friendly than the peat pellets, which is peat is a finite resource. So it is more environmentally friendly to use the coconut coir, and then just adjust from there by adding nutrients.
Is the process generally the same if you're going to grow indoors? Do you transfer from coir to regular soil or no? Yeah.
It's the same. You might not need to worry about hardening them off, like at that point we need to bring them outdoors. Although it's always a good idea to help the stems become stronger by doing like the petting of the plants or opening a window so it gets a little breeze, because that will help strengthen the main stem of the plant, but you don't have to bring it outdoors ever.
but you will absolutely need to put it in a pot with quote unquote regular soil to keep it growing.
Luann has a great tip for us if you're looking for seeds. Seed Savers Exchange is giving free seeds, about 75 packets of assorted seeds to nonprofits just for the cost of shipping. So you can look that up. I know Hudson Valley Seeds is also doing that for schools.
Only 20 packets though.
Oh, Colleen actually ordered from Hudson Valley Seed Company. Let's see. Can you transfer a plant that was started in an Aero Garden core pod and the like? Yes, definitely you can transfer that. So that's, again, similar to Coco Core. What is the best organic method to treat pests?
That's a big question that requires another hour-long workshop, which I will post in the chat. It depends on the pest, but there are a lot of methods. Neem oil is one of the most common ways to control for pests that are on the leaves of plants. So I'll post our pest management workshop in the chat for that person.
Oh, nice, Laura.
Here's a great one. Can a fan be placed in front of seed trays at the beginning of the sowing process? I don't think it's necessary. If anything, that'll just dry out your soil. What the fan really is for is to harden the stem of the seedling and make sure it's in low setting.
And you would need to wait until you have a couple sets of those true leaves. You don't want to do it too soon because the stem wall won't be strong enough to handle it when it's first poking out of the soil. So you need to wait till those multiple sets have set in.
And Christina is asking, how long can you hold on to seeds? She has seeds from last year. Are they still good to use? Absolutely. Yep. Yes. Usually seeds last from anywhere 5 to 7 years. I would say 5 years is good. If you're entirely not sure, you can do the paper towel method and, kind of see the percentage of seeds that germinate from that. So that's a good test. And I think that's all the questions we have in the Q&A.
All right.
Chat.
I'm also mindful of time because we are nearing 5:20. So I definitely thank everyone who stayed on this long. But Sophia, do you want to go to the next slide for us? I think we should focus on wrapping up just a smidge. Definitely want to let folks know we have a variety of upcoming virtual workshops that'll get us through to the end of June. Visit our Eventbrite to start to reply for them, if RSVP for them if you're interested. Not all of them are just up yet, especially the ones for the later spring, but we'll get those up pretty shortly. So please come back and join us for another session. Also want to mention in our next newsletter that will be going out later in March, there'll be information on Grow NYC's annual plant sale that will take place late April, early May. Seed orders, though, have to be in by, I think it's April 8th. So pay attention to that. More information coming there, or you can also just go straight to the Grow NYC main webpage and find information there. Also, in the newsletter, we are working on the logistics to actually do a free seed giveaway to our school gardeners, specifically in New York City. We have some logistics to work out, but we hope to be able to share information with y'all in our newsletter as well, which will be really exciting to share with you guys. And next, here's
we had a quick question about the garden intensive. Will it be in Governor's Island this year?
Laura just have been typing like little things in there.
No,
It's
that's great.
virtual as of now, so we'll definitely have a virtual one that's open to the general public. We're
Mhm.
not sure if we'll be able to do an in-person one yet,
Yeah.
but we'll keep you updated.
Yeah. And here's a sneak peek of some of the additional resources we will share with you in our follow-up email. So look for those along with the copy of the presentation as mentioned. Yeah. And thank you for coming to Seed Starting, and definitely thanks for sharing your time way past 5 o'clock today. Very cool. I'm glad we got to answer the questions that did come in. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, have a good afternoon.